Imagine it's a normal day of the week, and you're at work, or maybe you're at school, and your team is having a really important discussion. But there's a critical element they're missing, or they've got wrong, and you know what it is. It's the moment of truth. You can choose to speak up and bring that conversation on the right track. Or you can decide to stay quiet and say nothing. Which are you more likely to choose? Well, Elizabeth Morrison, an organizational psychologist, has found that 50% of us actually choose to stay quiet when in fact we've got something we want to say. Now, your perspective would have made all the difference to that conversation because you would have provided a different point of view. And when different people look at the same problem from a different angle, that's when we get diversity of thought. Diversity of thought leads to innovation. And your university, your company needs innovation to solve its current challenges and prepare for the future. Our education and our businesses also need to provide innovative solutions to our world, which is facing incredible geopolitical and social economic challenges. So innovation comes from diversity of thought. Diversity of thought comes from people being willing to speak up and share their thoughts. So why is it that 50% of us choose to stay quiet when actually we've got something to say? Well, there are internal reasons and there are external reasons. The internal reasons are things like your personality. Maybe you're shy, more of an introvert, less likely to speak up than someone who's more outspoken. But I think the real reason, the real internal reason you decide to stay quiet is because of that voice inside your head. You know the one. It tells you, don't say anything. You're bound to say something stupid, you'll look like a fool, stay quiet, it's safer. Or it tells you, what's the point of speaking up? Nothing you say is going to make any difference anyway. You might even get into trouble. Stay quiet, it's easier. That voice inside your head, it's telling you you'll be judged, maybe even rejected. It's telling you you're powerless to make a difference. Have you ever listened to that voice? I know I have. In fact, for many years, that's exactly what I did because I suffered from a phobic condition called erythrophobia. That's extreme anxiety of blushing in public. And boy, did I blush. It meant that I avoided social situations where I might have to talk to people or speak in front of people. It all started when I was 7 years old. I was sitting at the back of the class. I'm very tall, so the back of the class was always my spot. And my teacher, Mrs. Gibbs, was looking at me really strangely. And she was talking to the class about me. Because in fact, this wasn't a normal day. This was the day after my life had imploded. Because the day before, my mum had suddenly and tragically died. And my brother, my sisters, and I had all gone to school the next day as normal in some attempt at stability in our world that had just fallen apart. And Mrs. Gibbs, thinking she was doing the right thing, was explaining to the class what had happened. And one by one, I could see the backs of their heads turn around to stare at me with that same terrible expression on their face. And I felt sick to my stomach, as if it was full of cold black snakes sliming over each other. My chest was so tight I couldn't get air into my lungs, and my throat was so tight I could barely breathe. And it all exploded onto my face in a hot blush. And I froze. And that frozen, blushing state, whenever I was the center of attention, stayed with me all through school, all through my medical degree, and into my professional career. And I became an observer in my life, not a player. I chose to listen to that voice that told me I'd look like a fool, that I was powerless to change. I chose to stay quiet even when I had things I really wanted to say. And yes, it can be really wise to stay quiet sometimes. So there are situations where maybe you speak a little bit too much in meetings. In those situations, it would be wise to stay quiet and let other people do the talking and listen to what they have to say. But when being an observer is your natural state, and you're rarely a player, well, then it can affect your life, and it can stunt your professional growth, because it's only when you speak up that you can begin to unlock your potential. It's only when you speak up that you can influence your world and the world around you in a process that psychologist Abraham Maslow called self-actualization. And self-actualization is a choice we make every time we decide to speak up. Because when you decide to speak up, you get to figure out who you really are, what you really think. You test your ideas on the real world. You refine them. You learn how to communicate them effectively. Whereas when you keep them hidden, they'll come out eventually, usually in a burst of emotion, and then they really don't have the impact that you wish they would. When you decide to speak up, you're happier and you achieve more. Judith Glaser and many other neuroscientists have found that when we contribute to a conversation and we feel like we're adding value, we release a cocktail of happy hormones. They not only make us feel wonderful, but they make us more creative, more collaborative, more motivated, more productive. And when you choose to speak up, you accelerate your career. There's a 2020 study by somebody called Neil McLaren that found that speaking time is directly linked to whether people see you as a leader or not. And I certainly found that in my career. When I stayed quiet, people got promoted ahead of me, even though I had more experience and perhaps more qualifications. Once I started speaking up, my career took off. So when you speak up, you begin to unlock your potential. You're happier, you achieve more, and you accelerate your career. And the reason you might decide not to is because at some subconscious level, you're afraid that you'll be judged, maybe rejected, or that you're powerless to change. But it's one of the dualities of life, that the very thing you fear is the thing you create when you listen to that voice inside your head. So now let's look at the external reasons you might choose to stay quiet when actually you've got something you really want to say. Well, do your teachers or your leaders ask you for your opinion? And when you give it, do they listen to what you have to say with interest and curiosity? Or are they more likely to talk over you, laugh at you, get impatient with you, or even angry at you if you make a mistake? One impatient leader I worked with on her emotional intelligence complained, "I can't listen to everybody's views in my meetings. If I did, my meetings would go on forever." Well, how likely would you be to speak up with a different perspective in a meeting like that? And it's those external factors that have the biggest silencing effect on us, even more than our personalities. So there was a study published in the Applied Journal of Psychology in 2016 that found that extroverts, who'd been more likely to speak up, actually stayed quiet when their teachers or their leaders were judgmental or critical. Whereas introverts, who'd be more likely to stay quiet, would actually speak up when their teachers or their leaders were encouraging. So the facts speak for themselves. When we speak up in a safe environment, we contribute to that diversity of thought that leads to innovation. Even Einstein who we think of as an eccentric scientist working all alone in his attic, actually came to his theories through collaborative discussions with scientists he trusted. And that's been proven in the massive Einstein Papers project, which is publishing hundreds and thousands of his letters. Study after study shows that organizations with strong speak-up cultures that encourage diversity of thought, experimentation, and yes, even mistakes, generate more revenue from innovation. They're more productive, and they're more profitable than those that don't. And companies are beginning to catch on. They're investing billions in hiring and training diverse teams from different disciplines, different ethnicities, different cultures, because they want that diversity of thought. They want that innovation, they want that profit. And yes, it's fantastic to invest in diversity. But if only half your diverse teams and your diverse students are actually speaking up, well, then you're only getting half that diversity of thought. And you're only getting half the innovation you're investing in. And the world is only getting half the innovation it desperately needs. So what can we do? Well, if you find you're more of an observer in your life and less of a player, you can commit to taking care of your own needs for safety and belonging. When you do that, you step into your own power and you don't need endorsement from others. So how do you create that safe space for yourself? Well, you can take a tip that I learnt in medical school for treating phobic patients, and I later applied to my own erythrophobia. It's a 3-step process. Each step starts with the letter E. Step 1 is exposure. Step 2 is exposure. And step 3 is exposure. So in step 1, you start really small inside your comfort zone, wherever that is for you. In my case, I would just clear my throat in a meeting. I didn't say anything, but I risked being noticed, and that was a challenge for me. If it's an online meeting, maybe step 1 would be writing a comment in the chat. Once you're comfortable with that level of exposure, you increase it slightly in step 2. So in my case, I would get up from my seat, go to the end of the room, grab a cup of coffee, and then return back. Again, I wasn't saying anything yet, but I was exposing myself to being noticed. If it's an online meeting, step 2 might be turning on the camera so people can see your face. And once you're comfortable with that level of exposure, you increase it even more. So you might practice in advance what you're going to say and then actually say it in a meeting. It all depends on where you are on your own journey to speaking up and choosing self-actualization. So maybe you're already comfortable speaking up in the class or speaking up at work, but there's a global issue you feel passionate about. Ask yourself, what could you do inside your comfort zone to start practicing speaking up on that topic? And then step by step, with kindness and patience, you increase the exposure until eventually you're sharing your thoughts, you're speaking up, you're impacting your world, you're making a difference, and you're choosing self-actualization. So what about the external things you can do if you're a teacher or a team leader to encourage your students and your employees to speak up and contribute to that diversity of thought that will bring you the innovation that you want? Well, that's also a 3-step process. And it also starts with the letter E. This time, it's environment, environment, environment. It's all about creating an innovation-friendly environment that's welcoming and non-judgmental. So in step 1, you create an innovation-friendly environment before you even start by doing what I call bond before business. Even if it's just as simple as introducing yourself or just saying, welcome everybody, I'm really glad you're here and I'm looking forward to working with you. When you bond before business, you create that safe environment and people feel they won't be judged when they speak up. They feel empowered to make a difference. In step 2, you create an innovation-friendly environment by letting them know what to expect and what's expected of them. Our brains are prediction machines. We feel safe when we know what's going to happen next, so tell them. If it's a lecture or an information meeting, let them know they can just sit back and listen. If, on the other hand, idea generation's important, innovation's important, then tell them your ideas, we want to hear them, no matter how crazy, and we'll weed out the impractical ones later. So they know whatever they say won't be judged, and they feel empowered to make a difference. And step 3 is to create an innovation-friendly environment by being more like Einstein and less like that impatient leader I told you about. You know, the one that didn't have time to listen to everybody in her meetings. Einstein just invited a few colleagues he knew would challenge his perspective. That impatient leader just invited everybody out of the best intentions because she didn't want anybody to feel left out. But when you invite everybody, you end up listening to nobody because you just don't have the time. So in meetings where innovation's important, invite fewer people and listen to the ones you invite. So when you speak up in a safe environment, you unlock your own potential and you contribute to that diversity of thought that leads to innovation. So if you're more of an observer in your life and less of a player, remember to create a safe space for yourself, to practice speaking up with gentle and gradual exposure, exposure, and exposure. And if you're a teacher or a leader, or maybe somebody who just dominates the discussion a bit too much sometimes, then remember to step back and create a safe space for others to speak up by creating an innovation-friendly environment that's welcoming and encouraging. That's environment, environment, environment. The 3 E's are the secret to your own self-actualization, as well as making a difference for a better world. Thank you.